biggest risk I ever took was leaving a stable job at the bank to do my own startup. People see the financial risk, but the real risk is the risk in identity.
It's very easy to focus on the negative risk. What happens if it doesn't go right? What happens if it fails?
Anything you say after that, you're the authority. And if you build your emotional authority, you lead yourself to structural authority. You have to create your own reality. I know it sounds so crazy and we hear this all the time, but if you're not defining your narrative, someone else is.
At what stage in the journey did you think we're onto something here and the progression of the business potentially took off?
And that clicked in my mind and in my co-founder's mind. We looked at each other and we knew that we have something. When we got to the final table and we sat down to sell the business, I remember I was so nervous that my knee was shaking under the table. The next day felt completely different. It was a shift in identity. I had lost my identity. So Mahmoud Under500 became just Mahmoud.
Hello, I'm Kieran and welcome back to the Calculated Risks podcast. Today is officially the start of season 2 and we've got a great guest for episode 1. You might notice that we're recording in a different location and that's because we're recording from Dubai. So we've got new guests, new stories, and new wisdom. Today, I'm very grateful to be joined by Mahmoud Bartawi. He is an Emirati founder, an exited entrepreneur, and the host of his own successful podcast, Business with Bartawi. Mahmoud, thank you very much for being my first guest in Dubai.
Thank you for having me and welcome to Dubai. It's great to have you in Dubai and it's a pleasure to be with you on this podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I like to start my podcast the same way every time, and I know you've got an interesting journey. So my first question is all about risks. And throughout your career, I want you to think back to the first big risk you ever took. And tell me, how did it feel and how did it play out?
Biggest risk I ever took was leaving a stable job at the bank to do my own startup. And when you work in the bank, it was guaranteed pay month on month. I had stability. I learned about operational risk and management, but I wanted to do something different. I wanted to have a team of people around me. I wanted customers. I wanted to manage people. And taking that risk, leaving banking to join a startup, to set up my own startup was the biggest risk I took. And the risk is, people see the financial risk, but the real risk is the risk in identity. You're doing something for many years. Everyone sees you as stable and an expert. And now you are starting at zero, trying to build something. And to me, that was, some people said I was crazy. I think that was the biggest risk that you can have, is to shift your identity.
Thinking back to that time, how long did it take you to make that decision? You've identified that you want to start something on your own. How long did it take to leave corporate banking?
I don't think anyone jumps with both feet into the fire. When I see, Mark Zuckerberg, when I see all of these people, when they started their journey, when you read the story backwards, it looks like they jumped out of their university. But the truth is they take a sabbatical. And how that relates to me is I also did the same thing. So I basically ran my startup for 2 years while I had my full-time job. And that was kind of how I mitigated the risk and realized that, fine, when my startup could pay me at least 50% of what my job could pay me, then it made sense for me to jump ship.
And how many years ago was this when you started your startup?
2015, I decided that, I was looking for healthy food. I was someone that went to the gym. I had this gym coach and I said to him, I want to look like you. And he said, you got to come here to the gym every day, but you got to be on a meal plan. And at the time, I didn't even know what a meal plan was. But what I quickly learned was that 70% of the way you look is based on what you eat. So went back to the coach and said, how do I get on the meal plan? He gave me a few companies. And then I got on them and realized that just wasn't cutting it because the food was pre-cooked. And I still wanted to eat cooked food. So I went around looking for healthy food restaurants. There was 2. And at the time, one was called Subway, which everyone perceived as healthy at the time. And I went to them and actually said, look, I want to franchise one of your locations and, copy paste it, bring it closer to my house, kind of. And, as a banker, I still had my full-time job. I thought about mitigating my risk. And I thought if I entered into a system like a franchisee, then that would reduce my risk of failing. And I thought that would be the stepping stone for me to actually get to having my own brand one day. So understand the operations and then launch my own brand. And that's pretty much what happened. So Subway rejected me. They said, no, you don't have any experience. It's true you're a banker, but you don't have any franchisees under you. You've never run your own. So we can't give it to you. I went to the other company then and asked them, okay. And they said no. And they said, something I'll never forget. It was an American guy. And he says to me, we have too much money. We don't need your money. And I was surprised because I worked in the bank for many years and no one ever told me they had too much money. That was never something that was a problem. So that's when I decided to actually go and become a franchisee in a non-healthy food brand. I ran it for a year, gave it back to the franchisor, and took my money out at break even. What I gained was the experience. That was the experience that gave me the footing to launch my own brand.
And we'll come on to that just now. I'm really, really curious on the business you started 10 years ago, this 10-year journey that you've been on now of building and exiting a business. What is your relationship like with risk-taking now? Because you're in a very different place of life, family. How do you perceive risk at the moment?
That's a great question. I think there are different acceptable, there are different, tolerance that you can take depending on your age. So as a banker, I was selling products to customers. A customer who's 20 won't take a fixed deposit because they want to 10x their money. They would do something I did, which is a startup. Someone in their 60s would probably put money in a fixed deposit and just get, high security, low return. So I think age is very important when deciding what kind of risk someone can take. When it comes to me, I'm 41 years old. I would say in the middle of my life. So the risk I could take at 27 is very different than the risk I can take today. I'm not saying that I won't jump all in into an idea I see. I'm just saying it needs to be the craziest idea for that to happen. And, today today risk for me looks different. Today risk for me is teaching my children to think independently. How much independence versus non-independence? What is the right stage to do it? Risk in terms of business is also stability because I am different now than I was back then. So I always look at it from, I measure things in quarters and I try and work it backwards. So that's just my, framework that I use for analyzing risks. The biggest risk is actually not taking a risk. And I think, if you're watching this podcast somewhere and you think, I don't want to take any risks, and you have a corporate job and you're sitting there thinking, it's going to be stable here. It's crazy what everyone is talking about. And look, as long as your employer is making money, you're good. So it's your employer making money, your department making money, and you performing well. If one of those three things don't work, that job that you think is, risk averse or not so risky is actually super risky. And you find that out actually when you have your bonus coming up. Because when you go for your bonus, the way a bonus is calculated is always in those three steps. They look at if the company made money. So the company didn't make money, but your department made money and you are a high performer, you don't get anything. If the company made money, but your department didn't make money and you're not a good performer, tough. If the company didn't make money, your department didn't make money, but you're a superstar, you're not going to make that. So your risk is pretty much tied to many things. So when you think that having a job is not so risky, think again.
Yeah, I like that answer. And I think I speak from experience, and I'm sure you will relate as well, that when you are thinking about risk or taking that jump or starting something new, it's very easy to focus on the negative risk. What happens if it doesn't go right? What happens if it fails? Whereas what you should be thinking, or what might help to think about, is the positives. What happens if it goes well? What happens if you build and eventually exit? But why do you think most people focus on the negative?
Most people build spreadsheets and they give these spreadsheets to VCs or investors or people to look at. But what the problem is that I think, well, I can see for many people, they actually assume the best case scenario, actually, instead of taking into consideration that everything can go wrong will actually go wrong. And I say this from experience. When we started our healthy food brand in 2015, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. The contractor, wasn't good. He took our money and ran away. We didn't go the most expensive. We were price conscious. We tried to do shortcuts everywhere, and everyone bit back. But that kind of experience, you wouldn't get it unless you actually tried something. Because on paper, everything looks like, best case scenario, worst case scenario. But you need to be planning actually for the worst case scenario. And I know it sounds very counterintuitive, like, okay, I'm building something that says I'm going to do well. Why should I plan for the worst case? We took a company from Dubai, from a small city like Dubai, all the way to 6 countries. And we sold that brand to Kitopi Kitchens. And I'm telling you with all of my experience that everything that can go wrong goes wrong. And out of 20 things you plan, 2 are going to go right. And those 2 things will give you all the money you need to do everything else. And there are countless examples. You look at Amazon, for example, you hear about the successes. But how many projects and companies did they invest in that actually you don't even hear about today? So it's not just in my case. And if people that made it are saying this, I get it. The person who didn't make it is optimistic. I was there one day, super optimistic. But here I am saying that, everything we thought that we don't want to think about because it could go wrong one day actually shows up in front of you. And then the biggest risk becomes not tackling that problem. You have a sheet of things to do for the day and you start looking at number 1, number 2. And humans always tend to push down the things that are tough to do. Like, I'll do it next week, I'll do it later. The actual risk is not doing that, because if you put the hardest thing at the top and you actually focus on it, which is the tough thing to do, that's the way you mitigate your risk. And, managing risk is probably the most important thing in a startup, in any kind of thing you do.
Before we come on to that journey of you building and exiting a business, I'll tell you, you've got loads of stories and loads of wisdom to share as well. I want to go back to the earlier days where it was corporate banking, right? Because that's where you spent most of your career. We could be here forever. So I just want to understand, when you think back to those days, you envision and you have to summarize what working in corporate banking was like. Like, how do you think and how do you describe that?
It was beautiful. I got to meet the most, the top Emirati and non-Emirati businessmen in Dubai. I worked for the biggest bank, and then it merged and became even bigger. And I was in tier 1 corporate where I would meet these clients. So that was one part of the job that spoke to me, because I like to communicate with people that I find successful or not successful and learn from their stories. But the other part was the analytical part. I got to see every business from the inside. So as a banker, I would get the business to sit down. I would look at their proposal. You have a company like Dubai Holdings that wants to buy something back in the day. They would come to the bank, or any of the, I won't throw out any names, but they would look for funding in the hundreds of millions. And we would look at analysis, and I would take this and then present it to my boss, who would present it to his boss. So that analysis part spoke to my analytical brain. And then the other part of the communication with those clients, every time I got promoted and moved up the ladder, I got to meet better and better people. So instead of working with the accountant in the company or the CFO, I end up meeting the owner of the company. So I started meeting billionaires and, really profound people that taught me that it was just their persistence that kept them there, and a little bit of luck, in their words.
And when you meet all these entrepreneurs, high net worth people, millionaires, billionaires, successful business owners, I know from experience, sometimes there's certain things that stand out with people, whether it's like the way that they talk, something they say, or a value they hold. When you think back, what's some of the most interesting things that you still remember now and you've taken with you?
These people have very high emotional authority. I used to always look at things as structural authority. You walk into a company and you see structure and you say, okay, this is the CEO, this is the CFO, this is. But when you look at these guys, they move a room without anyone knowing their title. Sometimes they walk into a place and you see everyone moving, just looking at them. So how do they build their emotional authority? They don't insult anyone. They speak in less words than the person that's speaking to them. They clarify, they define, they don't rant on and on. And to me, these are the skills I think that I've learned from these people that they don't teach you in books. I'm going to make it a little bit relatable. You go into an organization and, you know what? Let's go out of business. You go into a hospital. A woman is pregnant. She goes into the hospital. She gets pushed into the delivery room. Outside the delivery room, she's nervous. Structurally, there's a GM of the hospital, there's a doctor, and all of this. But emotional authority has nothing to do with structure. Emotional authority is that old woman that's been in the hospital for 30 years that shows up now in front of this patient and says, calm down. I'm going to get you the anesthesia doctor. I'm going to get you the actual doctor. They're going to check you out and tell you that you're going to be completely normal. So on the outside, it looks like an old woman who's doing this. But emotional authority is much more powerful than structural authority. The CEO of that hospital, the GM of the hospital can all get replaced. But this woman will never get replaced because she's actually the person that probably replaces the other people. She probably knows the owners of the hospital. And when they come to her and ask her what's really happening. So it can be now back to an organization. You work in a bank, you see top people. You always wonder, how do they get to the top? Always, always, always. Before structural authority, there is emotional authority. So to make it even more relatable, if you go to a party, a house party, you're hanging out, you go there. How do you gain emotional authority in a place where everyone is there and everyone's trying to do the same thing? So is it the loudest person in the party that gets emotional authority? Is it the person that has the most money? Or is it the person that says the thing that's on everyone's mind that no one wants to say? So next time you go to a party, might be hot. There might be a lot of people around. They might be feeling it, but not saying it. But imagine you went and said, look, it's really hot here. I don't know about you guys. I'm going to take a step outside. You don't explain. You don't talk too much. You define, and you take a step out. Anything you say after that, you're the authority. And if you build your emotional authority, you lead yourself to structural authority. Now, none of these billionaires taught it to me this way. I'm explaining it in the way I understand. And my realization is these billionaires that I've met are not so different than you and I. They're just more persistent. They know, and it's like an inner feeling that they trust themselves. I don't think, and it's a bit of luck, as I said, because you need the stars to align for you in whichever way you want to say it. But, timing is super important. So when I talk about emotional authority, I talk about rhythm, structure, clarity. Humans normally think about money, grade, the stuff that you see on paper. It's the guy who defines the rhythm. You look at a company. What is a company? A company is two people showing up every Saturday for a meeting. The person that owns that rhythm is the authority. It's not the CEO. It's not, it could be the CEO on that company, but it could be someone else. So I don't want to go too much into detail to explain the differences between the two, but I think it's clear now that the structural authority that we see in the world is not what runs things.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, and I'm going to have to take some time to take that in. But what I think I heard, and I actually agree, it's a mix of like confidence, experience, and general aura, mixed with the ability to say more with less. How powerful can you say something with as little as possible? That was your corporate banking experience. I'm sure you've picked up loads there, but I'm really fascinated by the business that you built and eventually exited. So we spoke off camera, so I know how you founded this business because you identified a problem. But just for people watching, like, what was the defining moment where you said, I need to do this?
It was my problem. I was the one looking for healthy food. I was actually, I told you I went to this Subway and the other place, and the food was bland. It was the same thing over and over. So when I go there and I asked them, they said 90% of people are like you. They come here all the time. So I knew that there was a gap, at least for me, in finding cooked food. I didn't want the pre-cooked meal plans, so cooked. And then I said, how do I get this food to myself? No one wants me to be a franchisee. And I now have the experience because I ran as a franchisee in a non-healthy food brand. So then I thought, what if I had my own branch of a brand? And it sounded like a dream, a crazy dream at the time, but my crazy dream with a bit of experience helped me find a co-founder who had actually the same values as me, but different core competencies. So he was into art and visual. He was a branding guy. I was a numbers analytical guy with a bit of experience about running a brand. So together, combined, we ended up hiring an English guy who later became our head of operations. And we built a company that we took to 6 countries and sold to Kitopi. So that experience is, it's about clarity and separating, signal from noise, I would say.
And at what point in the journey, because 0 to 6 countries and, selling the business to Kitopi is wonderful. At what stage in the journey did you think we're onto something here and the progression of the business potentially took off?
It's funny. It actually happened at the food tasting. We had a food tasting once, and this was like the third food tasting we had, and we still didn't know if it would ever work. And a person actually said, "Can you pass me that under 500 dish?" And when they named it, was when I realized it was actually real. Someone called that dish the restaurant's dish. And in my mind, that's when it clicked. That was the first time that I realized it's real. We're sitting down together and you've named the product. It's not like Mahmoud's brand it's under 500. Can you pass me the under 500? And that clicked in my mind and in my co-founder's mind. We looked at each other and we knew that we have something. And that was the first spark. Many ups and downs throughout the journey. Many, many ups and downs in the journey. Until we sold it, I remember even selling it was something that we had worked on for 3 years. But when we got to the final table and we sat down to sell the business, I remember I was so nervous that my knee was shaking under the table. So you plan something for 3 years, it actually happens. You're sitting with the person that wants to buy your company. And now you're so nervous, your knee is shaking. I remember thinking, I don't want anyone here to notice what I'm feeling. So I tried to keep it together, and I realized that the next day felt completely different. It was a shift in identity. I had lost my identity. So Mahmoud under 500 became just Mahmoud. A noob, start from zero again. And I think, there's a lot of ups and downs in that journey. I'm happy to, share more. It's a pretty exhilarating one. And I think, I don't know. I don't know what, I don't know if everyone will get to experience that.
My question was going to be one that you've just answered, because I've spoken to maybe 4 or 5 people who have built and sold a business or multiple businesses. And in the conversation, every time it comes up about identity shift when you sell a business and you're Mahmoud from Under 500, and then the following day, that's no longer you're in your control or part of your identity. And I'm fascinated by that. So how difficult was that for you, that period? What did you have to go through to maybe find a new identity?
Tough. For me, it was super tough. I ended up doing more, because it's like when your car is stuck in the sand and you're actually trying to hit the race so you can get out, but you're digging deeper. And I found myself really, really pushing in the same direction. And I started getting something called burnout. So I had burnout when I was doing my company, but now I'm on 10x burnout, which means 3 days of no sleep. Why? I have money. I have ability to invest in businesses, but now I'm going crazy. It's not about money. It's about identity. So I actually took a plane to Amsterdam. Usually do that when I have, I just fly somewhere for a few days to clear my mind. And I like to read. I use Audible as opposed to physical books. And I listened to 2 books. And one was called The Third Door. And the other one is Atomic Habits. And what I basically did was took a list of 25 things that I was working on in search of my identity. And I realized making a list of everything you're doing is tough, because you actually have to think about each thing. So I put down 25 things, and then I removed 20, focused on 5. And from those 5, one thing that stood out to me that I was really interested in doing was explaining to founders, teaching and working with founders to help them with their storytelling. We all think that it's operations and money that you need for a startup, but it's not. You need to know how to communicate. You need to know how to understand people and to sell your idea. And you always have in front of you two people. Sometimes one gets everything and the other one gets nothing. And the person that gets everything is not the one who can explain revenue and operations. It's the one who can explain story, psychology, and understand people. When I understood that, I started a podcast. My podcast initially was to understand founders. Now it's on the same line, but it's more about helping them position their story so that they can access networks and they can upgrade their storytelling to be able to, again, attract talent, attract capital, and grow from where they are.
I'm very big on the psychology-led storytelling and building digital assets, which we've spoken about before, and we'll come on to that just now. You mentioned you're happy to share a couple of stories from the journey. Tell me two of the best or the funniest or the hardest ones that you can think of, which has a story to it which people can learn from.
Oof, you ask tough questions. But you know what? I'm happy to share a real-life experience. So this is now 2018. We're sitting down. Under500 now has 3 locations in Dubai. And we are looking to expand through franchising. And I started as a franchisee in another brand. Here I'm the franchisor, 3 locations. And this guy comes up to me and says, look, I'm going to give you the same food that you have on a dish. And I want you to tell me if you made this or I made it. So I was like, okay. And this was the CEO of a company called Kitopi, which was very small at the time. And he came with this question to my head of operations. My head of operations couldn't tell the difference between dish A and dish B, which is one we created and one they created. And then we decided to go with the one that he created, because if our head of operations cannot tell the difference and the prep time on their dish was half of the preparation time it took for our dish, it means we would have value. And the value for us would be translated into, when a customer is ordering on an app, the restaurant that shows closest to them depends on how far the restaurant is to them and the preparation time. So that variable is super important. And we had a very tough decision to make now. 2018, I'm sitting down, I have my head of operations threatening to resign, saying, if you give my recipes or the permission for this company to copy paste what we're doing on dark kitchens, then it wouldn't work for me. And I was looking at the data thinking, the data says they do it at half the time and you're not even able to tell the difference between the two. So do you go with data or do you go with people? And at the time we went with data. And what ended up happening was our head of operations, so we went with the data, we signed with them, we had signed expansion into Kuwait. Kitopi is going to help us expand in Kuwait, Saudi, UK, US. And I thought global expansion, that's what I wanted. But my right-hand man had gone. And what time showed us was that 2 months later, he decided to come back because he realized he made the right decision. And that was a really painful story, but it ended up leading us to, multi-country expansion. So always go with the data, no matter how much,
The data doesn't lie.
The data doesn't lie, right?
It can't.
You could be best friends with someone. If the data says you're not supposed to do something with them, don't do it.
Yeah, it's very easy to get emotionally attached to a decision, right? Especially in business when stakes are it, but the data doesn't lie, especially on something like that. One more story from your journey, from that particular part, anything that stands out to you?
Again, in 2018, we had gone to the UK looking to franchise. And we got there, we're standing at the exhibition, me and my co-founder and our head of operations, with a stand, a laptop, showing people what the product looks like in Dubai, the healthy food, take a location, open in the UK. And it was a really tough journey because everyone that would come by wanted to try the food. And every time they said, can you give us the food to try? Like, it looks nice in the picture, but like, what does it taste like? So we actually managed to convince this English girl who was, ended up becoming really good friends. She took a plane ride, came all the way to Dubai to try Under500. Tried it, loved it, went back, gave us down payment, and went back to the UK to start developing the branch. She goes to her bank. The bank says, look, we give you 50% funding, no problem. But the franchisor needs to open the first location in the UK. And to me, I was like, okay, so now we have to put money into the UK and money that we don't have because it's jammed into our growth here in the GCC. How do we do that? And at the same time, Kitopi Kitchens had come and said, we're going to help you expand to the UK. So if we went with them, we didn't need to make that investment, but we would not be able to do the franchise system. We would have to do dark kitchens, which means the thinking then became, if we have dark kitchens all over the UK, then when we go back to do another franchise exhibition, we can get the food delivered to the person in front of us, and now they could buy the product. So that's kind of the reason we ended up going with Kitopi. We thought it's like franchising 2.0, which is you can have the food delivered to you while you're at the exhibition and then sell physical branches. What we realized with time is that dealing with franchisees is a pain, very, very difficult, because you're dealing with different humans. Here you're dealing with a system. And I think when you have a system that has a rhythm that's repeatable, always has better clarity than, people that understand business in their own way. So that was a very, very interesting discovery for us at the time. Another story I can share was while that was happening, we had our head of operations trying to quit again because he had been getting offers left, right, and center. So something you probably don't know is, or people don't really share, is that if your company starts growing in an upward direction, everyone starts poaching your employees. Everyone wants to take them and create a competitor. Like, if I'm Kieran's friend, the default thinking of a human is not that Kieran might be super smart. He might be working on something that I don't know. No, he's only doing good because of his people. If I take his main guy and do it, I can do the same thing he did, right? Because I know you went to the same school. You're not that smart. And this is how people think. Proximity always makes people think that you are, I don't know what it is. It's like they compete and they think that you're not as good as you are, and they blame all the other factors. And if they really want to compete, they start taking those people from you. So a lot of people around me that actually I knew were people that were creating competitors. So we ended up with under 400 in Saudi, under 300 in Dubai. And in the beginning, I started getting really pissed off. But this is the kind of thing that actually got us to sell our brand, was that they made it. They basically before us, nobody would put a number in a name. No one usually calls their company a number, like under 500. But we, that kind of gave that value. So when it came to acquisition, that actually helped us, the copycats.
I think now might be a good time to mention that you have something else that you're involved in as well, which is correct me if I'm wrong, a 75-year-old family business that works in a couple of sectors over this side of the world. Like, how involved were you throughout your journey with Under 500? And then how difficult is it to balance doing different things of going on a family journey and a family business?
Managing a legacy business is very different than managing a startup. Legacy business looks at keeping decisions and not making new decisions. In a startup, it's all about new decisions. So the question becomes, how do I manage modernization of a business where people are stable and they don't really want change? It's not logical, it's more emotional. So you're sitting on a board and you have different personalities of different people, not all logical. How do you convert this into a modern business? How do you bring them to understand emotionally that it's safe? And I think that's pretty much the role that I play there. I'm not the person in the front. In that, I don't like to be the person in the front because it's easier for me to make things happen when I know that it's not a logical thing. When it's logical, it's anybody who has a second or third generation family business will really, really understand the nuisance of working with mentalities that are not logical. So family businesses, legacy, require modernization, and the smart ones are the ones that do it without burning bridges. And I think that's kind of how you steer that kind of ship. In terms of the business, it's, like I said, stable, requires patience, requires dealing with people.
which is the opposite to a startup, right? It's creative and quick thinking, innovation as well. And every decision needs to be made as quick as possible and as accurate as possible without all the information available. Whereas the legacy family business, for you or anyone else, it's slower. It's more emotional, like you said, rather than reactive. So it's two different worlds.
Completely. And one is measured in weeks, one is measured in quarters. In a startup, if you had a quarterly meeting, you would die. You wouldn't make it to the next quarter. But in a legacy business, the quarterly meeting sounds like it's too much. Like, why are we meeting every quarter? So completely different structure.
Completely different. And now I know, because I see your content, which is great, by the way, I really enjoy the podcast, that you're very focused on, like what we mentioned before, storytelling, authority-led marketing, and being loud with a purpose, not just noise, rather than quiet. Did you have that mentality when you were building Under 500? Like, were you still putting out content to try and tell stories and create a marketing buzz? Or has that come since you've actually exited the business?
At the time, I didn't know much about personal brand. And I think the world was more towards, marketing. I didn't understand the difference much. Today, I realize that quiet authority is much more important than just being loud. Being loud gets you attention. Quiet authority makes you heard. It's very easy to just say things. It's difficult to make it make sense and to convince people. And I think clarity comes from that. So when I was at Under 500, we were doing brand marketing. I wasn't really pushing my Instagram. I didn't think people needed to know who I was at the beginning. And as the journey progressed, I became Mahmoud Under 500, the person that would talk about the brand. I never understood that at the time, it was, the time of 2015 is very different than 2025. 2025, today, you can't afford to not have a personal brand and have a business. I know there are people that still do it, but, when everything gets automated by AI, which is happening, what are people going to remember? They're not going to remember your prompt. They're going to remember your face. And the way to get your face noticed and your brand noticed is by putting yourself out there. So big change over these 10 years. I was not someone that was out there. I almost thought that it was, why should I talk about it? I have influencers. We had a network of 200 influencers that would talk about it. Like, they're talking about the brand. But now I realize today, if I was to do it again, I think, when I look at startups that come on my podcast, when I sit with them, I realize the ones that are founder-led, I'll tell you something a little off topic. I was once asked to judge all the companies in Dubai. So a company here called Gulf Business, which is a company, they were giving out awards. And they said, we're looking for a judge for the award. Can you be one of the judges at the award? We'll give you all the companies and rank them and help us find the answer. And I looked at the leader's personal brand, because the way I thought about it was, look at this. If Gulf Business gave an award to someone and he had a growing personal brand, more people would see that award, right? So as a business, Gulf Business would do good. Number two, the person who's growing their personal brand has to have their business growing, because more and more people are following them. They're going to ask, what does Kieran do, right? Or what does this person do? As opposed to someone that doesn't have a profile picture on their LinkedIn, which still exists.
I know. I see it every day.
A guy messaged me the other day, I want to come on your podcast, and says to me, I told him, where's your he's a CEO of an exchange. I told him, where's your profile picture? He's like, no. I told him, no. It doesn't matter what your title is. No one knows you. But my company. I said, bro.
Yeah, I completely agree that in the last 2 years especially, but probably the last few, compared to 2014, 2015, personal brand is way, way more important than business brand. You can't really trust a big corporate company like Visa, MasterCard, BBC, Halifax, anything like that. But you can trust a person and a face behind the brand. And I think that's so important for something that I've been learning. I think as well that it's got to be founder-led. You've got to be on stage at the front of camera talking about the stories, because that builds credibility, trust, and authority. Give some tips then for anyone who's out there, because I know so many people message me and they're like, I'd like to start my personal branding journey. Perhaps they maybe do some LinkedIn posts, but they haven't maybe done any video content. Like, where do you start? Yeah,
LinkedIn is super safe because you can put text out. You can put text on Instagram as well, but LinkedIn is more, I think find the post that you like, the way that someone writes, and mimic it with your ideas. because, some people, they don't even know how to write. They don't have their own tone. They don't understand the difference between, writing in one way or another. Like you said, they don't know where to start. So I would always, if you're a B2B company, I would say LinkedIn. If you're a restaurant, I would say Instagram, more B2C, discovery. So someone looking to find something, look at pictures on Instagram and find you. But regardless, they want to see your personal brand. People want to connect with people. No more do people want to just see a logo and say, oh, this is... No, I think they want to believe in people. So you need to have a personal brand in 2025. Tips. Here's 3 things I would say for someone that's really looking to start. Number 1, rhythm. You need to have a rhythm. If you're posting once a week, you need to stick to once a week, twice a week. It's the same thing if you're a CEO of a company, you have a weekly meeting or a daily meeting, you need to stick to it. So number 1, rhythm. Number 2, measure. So you're going to put content out there, it's cool, but look at what works and what doesn't work. Your audience might not like your personal picture of you in your shorts every day on the beach. They might want to see something else. That might be good for a weekend post. It might not be, it needs to be relevant. And the third thing I would say is relax. If the view is low on it, it means no one saw it. We all measure, right? And then we think, oh, no one, low views. But the truth is, if no one saw it, they probably don't even know that it came out. So rhythm, measure it, but keep going and take it easy, because, measure the right things. It's not only about views. You can have content that's very low authority that gives you views. So I remember the other day I was looking at LinkedIn thinking, comparing how different people write. So I use my GPT, I would screenshot, Tony Robbins, this other guy I know, and the way I write. And I asked my GPT, over 6 months to 2 years, map me out quarter by quarter how each one's authority grows. And you'd be surprised, the person talking the most, getting the most attention, happens to run a content agency, is really good to attract Gen Zs. But for them, it's very hard to create authority, because someone like me, who's a bit, I would say, more on the serious side as opposed to that kind of content, would not give him an audience. No matter how many followers he has, it's too gimmicky. It's too much. So it's not about number also. So you might have a few of those, but your core content needs to build your authority. So I would always, this is again my opinion, I'm not talking to just grow numbers. I'm looking at growing sustainably quarter over quarter. If it's in legacy, week after week. If it's in startup, with my podcast, it's week after week. So again, back in startup mode. And that's how I define, what you should be posting depending on where you want to go. And then you work it backwards. If I want to get to Mars, I would start posting the keyword Mars in the first month on my LinkedIn, different stuff. The second thing would be Dubai and Mars, some kind of relationship. The third thing would be a founder leading a company from Dubai into Mars. And as you're posting that, you're narrowing down reality to meet you. And and people will come to you. It's you have to create your own reality. I know it sounds so crazy and we hear this all the time, but if you're not defining your narrative, someone else is. When someone comes on this podcast, you set the frame for them. You define the story and the narrative based on the conversation. It's the same thing in real life as well. It's just, if you don't do it, someone else is doing it for you.
Yeah, there has to be a element of control, right, on what you're putting out there. I think one of the greatest things that I was taught, and I still do now, you have to understand the audience that you're trying to talk to. I think you do that very well because you talk to founders and entrepreneurs, and your podcast is full of founders and entrepreneurs. And the shorts and the written content that you put out always tells a story about their journey, and someone is going to relate to that. And you've got a great consistency in what you put out, which I think is very, very important.
Thank you. Yes.
Thinking back to all the things you've done in the last 10 years since starting the business, who are some of the most influential people that have helped you on that journey? And what do you remember them for?
For being kind, unwavering kindness. I joined my first bank. I remember it was my dream job. I'd been, since I was 13, I was working every summer, part-time jobs to make money. And my dad, but he wanted me to, become a man kind of thing. So I was doing all of those jobs part-time, thinking that I would get my first full-time job when I finished university. Finished university, applied to the biggest bank, got rejected. 7 days later, I get this email that starts with "unfortunately." And rejection. So I got the email of the head of HR. I sent him a message and in one line and pretty much said, look, if you give me a chance to have another interview, I would prove that I would always be loyal to you. And he gave me that chance. That was kindness from him. And this story was 20 years ago. Many months later, 3 months later, I went to him and I wanted to buy my first home. And we had exception after exception in my application. I needed to be a confirmed staff of the bank to take a loan. So I hadn't even got to 6 months to get confirmed. And here I am on the 3rd month telling him I want to buy the property and give me a loan. And he says, you know what? I believe in you. Let's do it. After all the analysis. So what I think is that is a kind of person. And I thought that story was only with me. 20 years later, we have a group for all the bank people that joined the bank. And in that group, he has the highest respect, even though he's retired, even though he's not the richest one, even though so many things that, even though so many other people taught so many things and were nice to other people, but his kindness is what stood out, his belief in people being kind. And I think Jeff Bezos says it best. He says, it's harder to be kind than to be clever.
I'm really pleased that you said that because, short story, I didn't want to pull this back on me, but it's stuck with me ever since. So 2 weeks ago, since being in Dubai, every single week I've gone for shisha on a Saturday because why not? It seems to be the thing to do. And there was this gentleman from Eastern Europe who was working there. And you could see me working on the laptop. I work on the laptop every Saturday night. It's great. I enjoy it. And he pulled me aside and I spoke to him for like 15 minutes and his English was good, but a little bit broken. And he was just so keen to start an online business.
He works at the shisha.
He works at the shisha. That's all he does. But he wants to start an online business because he's got a young family. And I gave him 15 minutes of advice. That was all he wanted. And that was it. He gave me the bill an hour later and I left and I said, nice to meet you. And he said, thank you for being kind. And I was like, wow. I was just giving advice. I didn't expect it. And he's probably not going to forget that conversation.
That's the most powerful thing you can do because people, it stays with them. I'm talking 20 years.
Staying with me.
Yeah. 20 years later on a podcast about someone that did an act of kindness to me 2 times. Not once, twice. He just gave me a second interview, but that changed my life. To him, it was just a phone call. Give him a chance. See him again.
Yeah.
That was it. He was the head of HR of the biggest bank, but he didn't need to at all. 20 years later, here I am talking about him. I look for a chance to give back to him in anything I can. And he never asked also. So, and this feeling with me is with all those bankers that joined. At some point, he was kind to someone. And that's hard. It's not easy.
The audience that I have is mostly UK and European. So it's great for you to get some exposure to a different audience and different cultures. For the people that are from the UK and maybe haven't visited Dubai, I'm very grateful to have a local Emirati on. But how would you describe Dubai in a couple of sentences for someone who's lived in most, if not all of your life?
So I travel a lot. My kids have a home in the UK. I've been to the UK many times. I had a business also in the UK. So I'm a little bit familiar with the UK. I can easily start by saying, imagine you kept all of your income. I mean, that's one I can answer in that way. I can say, imagine you are someone that enjoys warm weather. Now, it can get really warm. So that's, that's something good. And, like every coin has 2 sides. So maybe balance and start with balance. So if you are an entrepreneur looking to launch something one day in a place that supports startups, in the sense that you don't have a problem with people flying in from different places of the world, you have very easy, trade license set up, all of those things. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to try something, I would suggest trying it in Dubai. I've heard Daniel Priestley say this on the podcast also. He's not from Dubai, but he's talking about it. When I speak to my real estate agents, so we work as in the legacy family business. We are in the industrial, not the residential or commercial properties. And when I asked them, all the brokers I work with, who are the top 2 nationalities that are going to be coming to Dubai in the next 5 years? One is Indian. The next one is English. Mm-hmm. So what I see from where I'm sitting, maybe not so much the Russians and the other ones, Chinese, okay, but and you can see the news is clear with different personalities that are looking at coming, to Dubai. And I think it's not only about the weather and the taxes. I think it's also about safety, which is the number 1 reason people come to Dubai, actually. If I have kids, I don't need to be worried about them going to a gas station at night, someone trying to take their phone, someone trying to loot them. Now, I know these are exceptions, but as a father, I will do everything in my power for my kid to be safe, even if it means moving somewhere else. And you only need one thing to go wrong to someone you know to understand the value of security. So, I know a lot of people, they say, no, it's, run in a certain way. We are run in a different way. That, forget everyone. Think about your child. What does that person need? More important than saving 40% of their income, more important than everything, safety. I would always say, if you're looking for safety and you're a family man and you want to start somewhere, I think Dubai is perfect. Just see how things progress. And, I think ideas, people don't get convinced in one thing. People get into frames. Just once you hear this, you'll start seeing how reality shapes. And I think it is, the theory becomes a fact with time. And everything Dubai said they would do, they did. They built the tallest tower in the world. They built the metro. They built the Palm Jumeirah. I don't need to sell Dubai anymore. I think it's, I grew up a few years in the States. Now those people from the States are calling me, asking me about Dubai. So
yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. Safety is incredible here. And from someone who has not long been in Dubai, I think the opportunity as well, because most of the people I meet who aren't locals, like you, have moved here, and they've usually moved here for one of the reasons that you've mentioned. So they all have a similar mindset and a similar approach to what they're trying to achieve, which is really good.
Kieran, sorry to interrupt. I had a company with 60 people. I was the only Emirati in it.
Really?
Yeah. My co-founder was not. My head of ops was English. Everyone else was different nationalities. So it's not, for the person out of Dubai listening to this, it's not dominated by Emiratis. We are 10% of the population. So we work and we are excited to have smart and good people work with us. My co-founder, if I was just focused on finding someone exactly like me, it would narrow my options to nothing. Sorry.
That's a good point. No, that's a good point. Yeah. And that's what I see. Lots of every nationality that I can imagine is here doing some of the most important jobs, whether it's finance, technology, that they're everywhere. I guess my last question is, what are you doing outside of building a content machine? Because the podcast is going well, the short form, long form, I love it. What else is keeping you busy at the minute? And is there anything on the radar that you want to share that people might be able to keep an eye out for?
So I raise beautiful children and I try to get them to think out of the box. I'm now personally telling them to read shareholder letters. They have these business courses and I tell them, drop it. Just pay attention to shareholder letters. See how the CEO of a company is held accountable by the people around them, shareholders, and learn from that. And that's pretty much what I'm doing with my personal time. It's for the next generation. Now, here's the thing I've never shared before that I'm going to share here for the first time. We have a huge problem in the GCC. It's actually in the world, but more prevalent in our area. Water. The next big crisis is going to be water. I'm meeting water companies looking for solutions. And I think a solution that's big enough is something that get me super excited to move and do something, with a very short rhythm and full, just like I'm doing. I think the idea needs to take over. It's not about you getting convinced. It's the idea needs to convince the person. And I think the more I look at it and the more I study about it, the more I see how water is actually a huge problem. It's not just, it's survival. We are 90% water. But most people don't count how much water they drink every day. They don't even think about water. And that to me is mind-boggling. Like, how are we humans not figuring out water? So I'm actually meeting with the top VCs next week and the week after who invest in water companies, looking for solutions that could work. And this is something I haven't shared. So I think the direction for the next 10 to 15 years, the wars that we see will be fought about water. Today it's about resources, but the main resource will be water. Ever since before, human civilization traveled along the coast when we were hunter-gatherers, even before that. So I think water.
Well, that's really interesting. But even more interesting than that, you are investing in your kids' future knowledge, which I think is the best investment you could ever make.
Yeah.
Mahmoud, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
I hope you continue, Kieran. I like that you're here. I like that you're a podcaster in Dubai. I like that you're scaling your network, and I really want to support you. I think, if there's anyone here that's listening to this, they should understand also and see you as an example for them. I
appreciate it, man. Thank you very much. And that's the end of episode 1 with Mahmoud Bartawi. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But before you leave this podcast, go like, comment, and subscribe to Mahmoud's podcast, Business with Bartawi. We'll see you in the next episode.